In this video, we're going to classify the following data as either quantitative or qualitative. And when we have quantitative data, all that means is it has something to do with numbers. If it has any type of number associated with it, you can say that it's quantitative. Qualitative is basically like having a quality. Like if somebody has, black hair or brown hair or blonde hair, like that might be a quality that you look for in a person. But also, it's whenever you have a category of some kind, it would be more of a qualitative data rather than quantitative, which is, to do with actual numbers that you can count and add together and so forth. To give you a better idea of the difference, let's say I have the height of two people. Let's say that I have person A, and that person is going to be 72 inches tall. And then person B, that person is going to be 67 inches tall. Now, I can actually get an average out of these two by going 72 plus 67 divided by 2, and that will give me the average height between these two people. But if I were to look at person A and person B and say that, okay, person A has green eyes and person B has blue eyes, I can't add green and blue together and get some kind of average. That just doesn't work out. So this is the main difference between having quantitative data and qualitative data. But we're actually going to go one more step further and further subdivide it, because even in quantitative data and qualitative data, we have different types. So for example, right here we have an eye. This is continuous. And then we have discrete. So these are different types of quantitative data. So the way I like to think about it is if I have like a number line, and if I see here that, we have a discrete value, basically, all that means is we have, a normal numbering system. And for some, purposes, you could say that discrete is, just all the integers. It's not that simple, but if you're taking statistics, that might be a passable understanding. But when we talk about continuous, normally what we're saying is we're kind of zooming in more and more and more as much as we need to. For example, if I want to zoom in on this, 0 to 1, I could make another number line where I start out at 0, then I go 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, and all of this is just what we have right here. But there's no reason I have to stop there, right? I can go even smaller than that. I can go into here, and then I have 0 here, and then 0.1 here, and here I'll have 0.01, 0.02, etc., all the way up until the point where I get to 0.1 here. The idea is we're just getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And continuous is normally used for like measurements. So if you were to think about how we measure time, for example, if we only measure time in terms of seconds or minutes, then we can say that that's discrete. But the reality is we can get even smaller. We can say milliseconds or nanoseconds or picoseconds. We can keep getting smaller and smaller and taking measurements that are smaller and smaller. Therefore, it would be continuous. But if you think about like a shoe size, you don't ever have a shoe size that's like 12.00002. Your shoe size is always going to be like 11, 11 and a half, 12, 12 and a half. And this would be discrete. And it's also proof that, just because it's discrete doesn't mean it has to be an integer. It can be. And a lot of the times it may very well be. And then over here in our qualitative data, we have our nominal and our ordinal. Nominal just means that it's regular categories, there's no order to them. And ordinal means that there's an order to them. So for example, if we were to talk about letter grades in school, A, B, C, D, F, there is an order to this. A is greater than B, B is greater than C, C is greater than D, and D is greater than F. So there's an order to it. But if we were to say, this person has blue eyes or green eyes or brown eyes, there's no order to how we can arrange this. Brown is not greater than green and green is not greater than brown. So because there's no order to it, we would just say it's nominal. Now that we have that terminology down, we can look at some of this data here. Number A, the day of the week on which the power outage occurred. Obviously, it's not going to be quantitative. There's no number associated with Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So it is going to be qualitative. And then we have to decide, okay, is it nominal or ordinal? And I would argue that it is ordinal because there is an order to when every single day happens in the week. It's always Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So because of that, I'm going to say that A is ordinal and it's qualitative. Looking at B, the number of automobile accidents at a major intersection in Pittsburgh on the 4th of July weekend. This is going to be quantitative. And the obvious giveaway here is they say number. And if it says number, it's definitely going to be quantitative. But now, let's look at the number of automobile accidents we have. Is that continuous or discrete? Well, you don't have 1.003 car accidents. You have one accident or two accidents or three accidents. So I would say that this is discrete. So we finished A, we finished B. C, the ignition times of material used in mattress covers. Because this is time, it is numeric. We're talking about, 1 second, 2 seconds, or here it explicitly says seconds. And I would argue that it is discrete because we're not talking about milliseconds or nanoseconds or picoseconds. It says very, clearly here that we're talking about in seconds. So I'm going to say that that is discrete. And there are times where, it is a really fine line between one or the other, and there may not always be an objectively correct way to look at it depending on, your perspective of what you're talking about. Here we're saying the breaking strength of threads in ounces. Well, because it's ounces, it's definitely going to be a numeric value. And again, because we're given a unit here, and unless we're, doing 0.00345 ounces or something like that, I would still say that this is discrete. And honestly, all of these might end up being discrete. This question was not created to really distinguish between continuous and discrete. This is something I wanted to add in, but here you can see it only says quantitative and qualitative. Here we have the gender of workers absent on a given day. Well, gender is a category. You're either male, female, non-binary. No matter how you choose to divide up and categorize people into different genders, you can come up with, 100 different divisions, but at the end of the day, there's still categories that people, get put into. You can add or remove as many categories as you want, but it's still going to be qualitative. And there's no actual order to it. Just like, how there's no order to blue eyes, green eyes, brown eyes, there's no order to the genders. Now, this one is the number of computer breakdowns per month. This is, again, going to be quantitative because, number is a giveaway right there. And it's definitely going to be discrete because you don't have half a computer breakdown or a quarter of a computer breakdown. So I'm going to go with F. And let me just say, I think it would be fair, for seconds and ounces, again, these are somewhat subjective. Because these are measurements, it's probably best to say, okay, they could be either continuous or discrete, depending on whether or not we are setting this bound here. Here it says in seconds, but are we saying that we're not going to measure to a smaller degree than 1 second? If we say we're never going to measure smaller than 1 second, then that would be discrete. But if we go to milliseconds but if we ever decide that we want to measure, 0.0001 seconds or something like that, then we would be talking about continuous. Here, the number of gamma rays emitted per second by a certain radioactive substance. Again, because it's a number very obviously quantitative. And once again, depending on how we decide to measure this, it could be either continuous or it can be discrete. We're saying that we're measuring 1 per second, but if we were to do any type of fraction where we end up with some kind of irrational number, then that is when we would say that it is continuous. H, the ethnicity of students in a class, that is definitely a quality of a person, so we're going to say that ethnicity is definitely qualitative. And again, there's no order to ethnicity, so therefore we're going to say that that is nominal. H. Number I, the daily consumption of electric power by a certain city, and this is going to be in millions of kilowatt hours. Once again, depending on your definition, it is definitely going to be quantitative, could be continuous, could be discrete, most likely going to be discrete. I'm going to put this as both though. And then on J, the level of ability to handle a spinner achieved by a machinist at the end of training. I'm not entirely sure what this question means, to be honest. When we say level of ability, what are we using to categorize this? Like level 1, level 2, level 3? We could be saying, level of ability is pro, level of ability is amateur, something like that. Good, great, bad. So it does kind of matter how you interpret the question. I'm going to, interpret it that way where it could be good, great, bad. Kind of like how they have those surveys where you're like, I strongly agree with this, I somewhat agree with this, I'm in the middle, I don't agree with this, or I strongly disagree with it. So I'm going to go ahead and say that that would be ordinal. Now, it really depends on how you interpret that question. But hopefully you can see the difference between quantitative and qualitative and the difference between the subcategories here. Because that's the purpose of the video, not necessarily arguing over how we're going to interpret, the question itself, but rather, do we know the difference between what continuous is and what discrete is, what nominal is, and what ordinal is? So hopefully this was helpful, and that's it.